To pay off my family's $8 million debt to ruthless loan sharks, I married Garrett Vance, an uneducated coal mining tycoon. He wanted me because I was a beautiful, Ivy League educated girl. I wanted him because his bank account was a bottomless pit of cash. I despised his lack of culture. I hated the way he smacked his lips when he chewed. Armed with his black card, I ruled his mansion like a tyrant. Yet, whenever I maxed out his credit cards, he would just smile warmly and say, "You look so beautiful, Chloe. The boys just pulled another truck of coal out of the shaft. It's all yours to spend." The night before Christmas Eve, Garrett went back to the West Virginia mines to hand out year-end bonuses. There was a cave-in. He didn't make it out. Honestly, I felt a wave of relief. I was finally free of him. I put on my best makeup, ready to board a flight to Los Angeles for a solo vacation. But right before I left, his lawyer arrived with the key to Garrett's private safe. Inside was a debit card containing $50 million, resting on a crumpled note with messy, uneven handwriting. "Chloe, this money is for you. Take it to LA. Go live the life you've always wanted." Mr. Lawson, the attorney, placed the heavy brass key onto my marble dining table. Next to it lay a sleek bank card. "Before Mr. Vance passed, Mr. Lawson said quietly, he made it very clear that every single dollar of this $50 million has gone through a rigorous, legal audit. It's completely untangled from any high-risk shadow lending or unlicensed mining profits. He wanted me to tell you, this money is clean." I picked up the card. It felt ice-cold in my hand. Even in death, Garrett remembered my neuroses. I had always complained that his cash smelled like coal dust. I hated the physical bills, swearing they were covered in his spit from counting them. So, he had washed this $50 million spotlessly clean, just for me. I slid the card into my designer bag and looked up at the lawyer. "Is there anything else?" Mr. Lawson blinked, seemingly caught off guard by the fact that there wasn't a single tear on my face. "No, ma'am. The remaining real estate and mining rights are caught up in complex legal disputes. Mr. Vance's instructions were that if dealing with those messy assets became too much of a headache for you, you should just walk away. Just take this $50 million in cash and run." I nodded. "Understood. Please show yourself out." Suddenly, the front door of the mansion was kicked open from the outside. The heavy, custom-made copper door slammed against the wall with a deafening crash. A crowd of people barged into my foyer. Garrett's relatives. Leading the pack was his uncle Silas, wearing a cheap suit splattered with dried mud. His boots were clearly a size too big, leaving dark, wet streaks across my pristine Persian rug. Behind him were 7 or 8 men and women from his hometown. Silas pointed a thick, dirty finger right at my nose. "Hand over the money, Chloe. Now that Garrett is dead, the Vance family fortune isn't staying in the hands of some outsider bitch like you." A woman next to him spat right onto my hardwood floor. "Cold-hearted gold digger. If Garrett hadn't paid off your father's debts, you'd be selling your body on the streets by now. Now that he's gone, you think you can just pack up and run with his cash? No way in hell." I sat on the velvet sofa, unmoving. My eyes drifted to the wet puddle on my cream-colored wool rug. It was sickening. When Garrett was alive, as rough and uncultured as he was, he never dared to spit inside the house. He knew I was a germaphobe. Every time he had to cough, he would run out to the backyard. Now that he was dead, these people were ruining my home. Seeing my silence, Silas assumed I was terrified. He marched toward me, reaching out to grab the designer bag on the table. "I'll take that." I picked up my steaming cup of black coffee and threw it directly at him. The scalding liquid splashed over the back of Silas's hand. He shrieked, clutching his hand as he stumbled backward. "You crazy bitch. You burned me. Trash the place. Smash everything. Find where she hid the rest of the money." The group raised their crowbars and iron pipes, ready to tear the living room apart. I calmly pulled out my phone and dialed a number on speakerphone. The dispatcher's voice echoed through the room. 911, what is your emergency?" I spoke clearly into the receiver. "I am at 101 Aspen Heights Drive. There is an active home invasion. A mob has forced entry into my residence with weapons and is attempting an armed robbery. I am the homeowner, Chloe Vance. I have active security cameras recording everything." The room fell dead silent. Silas's eyes widened in shock. "Robbery? I'm his uncle. Taking my own nephew's money isn't robbery." I hung up, pulled a stack of documents from my bag, and tossed them onto the table. "Garrett's will is legally registered with the state probate court. I am his sole primary beneficiary. None of you have any blood relation to me under civil law. Forcing your way into a private residence with dangerous weapons to seize property is a Class A felony. Under state law, armed home invasion carries a minimum of 10 years in federal prison." I stood up, smoothing the creases of my silk dress. "As for the coffee, you attempted to assault me. It was self-defense." I looked at the head of my estate security, who had just rushed in. "Block the exits. No one leaves until the police arrive." My security team immediately moved into position, blocking the shattered doorway. The relatives, who had been shouting so boldly just moments ago, instantly panicked. Silas, clutching his red, blistering hand, hissed at me, "Chloe. You are heartless. Garrett's body isn't even cold yet, and this is how you treat his family?" I stared at him with cold, dead eyes. Is his body not cold, or are you just eager to pick his bones? When Garrett was alive, you leached off his blood. Now that he's dead, you want to tear his corpse apart and sell it. The police arrived minutes later. As Silas and his crew were led out in handcuffs, they were still screaming curses at me. Finally, the house was quiet. I pointed to the stain on the rug and looked at my housekeeper. "Throw it out. And sanitize every single spot they stepped on." 3 times. The housekeeper nodded, trembling as she began to clean. I sat back down on the empty sofa, staring at the vast, silent mansion. Garrett was dead. The man who snored like a chainsaw, smelled of cheap tobacco, and chewed with his mouth open was gone. No more rough, sandpaper-like hands trying to touch my face. No more soot-covered heavy jackets hanging next to my expensive designer coats. Even the faint scent of his cheap cigarettes had dissipated. I traced the cold edge of the black card in my bag. "Garrett, I thought, you died a messy, dirty death. But you sure kept your money clean. I suppose that's the most dignified thing you've ever done." 10 p.m. The mansion was so quiet I could hear the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I had sent the housekeeper home early. I walked over to the mahogany liquor cabinet. On the very top shelf sat a bottle of Domaine de la Romanée-Conti. Garrett had bought it 2 years ago. He didn't know anything about wine, he just knew it was incredibly expensive. He had brought it home to please me, only to be met with my biting sarcasm. I had told him, someone who drinks cheap draft beer like water would only ruin a wine like this. "Don't touch it. You'll get your dirty hands all over my bottle." Since then, he had never touched that cabinet again. I uncorked the bottle and poured the deep red liquid into a crystal decanter. Holding my glass, I took a slow walk through the mansion that no longer held Garrett. It was far too quiet. Usually, around this time, Garrett would just be getting back from the mines. He would open the front door with extreme caution, standing at the entryway to change his shoes. He would leave his mud-caked work boots outside on the porch, walking in on his socks, terrified of leaving a single mark on my spotless floors. Then, he would call out in his booming voice, "Chloe. I'm home. The cafeteria at the mine had some great garlic bread today, but don't worry, I didn't eat any. Didn't want to gross you out." Then he would disappear into the bathroom, scrubbing himself raw with heavy soap, washing at least 3 times before he dared to even stand near me, asking sheepishly, "Chloe, can I sleep on the bedroom floor tonight?" But tonight, there were no muddy footprints in the foyer. There was no sound of running water from the master bath. No pleading, gentle voice. I took a sip of the wine. It was silky smooth, with notes of dark berries and oak. This was the life I wanted. No coal dust, no loud, uncouth noises. I pushed open the door to his study. This room had always been Garrett's private space, a place I rarely entered. But I knew he kept a locked drawer in his desk. I had always assumed he kept a secret stash of cash in there, or maybe photos of some girls he met at the local bars. After all, isn't that what all rich rednecks did? Now that he was dead, there was nothing left to hide. I grabbed a crowbar from the utility closet and pried the lock open. The drawer slid out. There was no cash. No photos of other women. Just a pile of random, bizarre junk. Hundreds of broken, blunt pencil stubs of varying lengths, piled up in a corner. And a thick stack of crumpled, cheap yellow legal paper, the kind miners used to keep inventory. The sheets of paper were covered in messy, dark charcoal smudges. They were caked in black coal dust. I frowned, picking up one of the pages. The black dust instantly stained my fingertips. With a grimace, I shook my hand. The paper showed a messy, dark sketch. The lines were chaotic and thick, I couldn't even make out what it was supposed to be. Garrett was basically illiterate. He could barely write his own name. Why on earth was he trying to draw? The drawer smelled heavily of damp earth and sulfur. A leopard never changes its spots, I thought bitterly. Even living in a multi-million-dollar mansion, he couldn't leave his coal behind. I scooped up the papers along with the broken pencil stubs and threw them all into the trash can. A cloud of black dust billowed into the air. I held my breath, took a few steps back, and used a wet wipe to scrub my fingers. The black soot was stubborn, lodged deep in the ridges of my skin. A wave of irritation washed over me. I unlocked my phone and opened Snapchat, wanting to find someone to talk to. I remembered a young artist I had met at a gallery downtown. He was clean, soft-spoken, and refined. I scrolled past a contact pinned near the top of my chat list, a contact I had labeled the coal dust. My finger hovered over the screen. His profile picture was a dark, grainy photo of a mine shaft entrance. Whenever I used to ignore his calls, he would send me endless messages. "Hey Chloe, I'm just at the entrance of the shaft. Got some signal here. Did you eat dinner yet?" I locked my phone. I tossed it onto the sofa. Looking at my half-empty wine glass, the rich taste suddenly felt incredibly bland. I looked out into the empty living room and whispered, "Garrett, you are so annoying. Even dead, you leave your trash for me to clean up." On the third day, the morgue called me to identify the body. I did a full face of makeup. I wore a black haute couture dress, pairing it with 4-inch Louboutins. To block out the smell of death and decay, I practically bathed myself in expensive French perfume. The hallway outside the cold room was packed with people. Aside from me, they were all families of the other miners who had died in the cave-in. They wore dusty, oversized winter coats, kneeling on the dirty linoleum floor, sobbing hysterically with tears and snot running down their faces. I stood there amongst them like a peacock that had wandered into a chicken coop. An assistant walked up and offered me a blue surgical mask. "Mrs. Vance, please prepare yourself. Mining accidents, they aren't pretty." I took the mask, looked at the cheap, disposable fabric with distaste, and tossed it aside. "I don't need it. Just take me in." The assistant pushed open the heavy steel door of the cold storage room. A sharp, overpowering wave of chemical disinfectant mixed with a sickening, metallic stench hit me instantly. I reflexively covered my nose with a silk handkerchief. The assistant pulled out one of the metal drawers and unzipped a yellow body bag. "This is Garrett Vance." I looked down. In that fraction of a second, my chest tightened. It wasn't the goofy, sunburned face I was used to seeing. It was a horrific, unrecognizable mess of torn flesh and bone. His face was caked in thick black coal dust, soot that had been ground so deeply into his skin during the collapse that it had become one with his flesh. Half of his skull was completely caved in. His lips were split wide, exposing teeth stained with dark residue. The expensive Italian suit he had bought specifically to wear around me was reduced to bloody, shredded rags, stuck to his body by dried, black blood. Dirty. It was so incredibly dirty. It was the most grotesque thing I had ever seen in my life. My stomach violently turned. It wasn't grief. It wasn't heartbreak. It was pure, visceral physical revulsion. I pushed the assistant aside, bent over, and retched. I threw up my morning coffee right onto my $800 designer heels. The sobbing families outside stopped, staring at me in absolute shock. Someone muttered under their breath, "Look at her. Her husband is dead and she doesn't even cry. She's just disgusted by him. Typical. Rich girls have no souls." I heard them. But I didn't care. I stood up straight, wiping my mouth with my silk handkerchief. Then, I tossed the stained handkerchief into the biohazard bin. My eyes fell on the hand peeking out of the body bag. 2 of his fingers were broken, and the nails were packed with black dirt. I suddenly remembered that very hand reaching out to hold the train of my wedding dress so it wouldn't touch the wet ground, only for me to kick him away. "Don't touch me, Garrett. You're filthy." At the time, he had slowly pulled his hand back, wiping it nervously against his trousers, smiling his usual goofy smile. "Right. Sorry, Chloe. I'm dirty. I won't touch." And now, he had finally become nothing more than a pile of broken, discarded flesh. I turned to the morgue worker. "It's him. Cremate him. Would you like to hold a viewing or a memorial service first, Mrs. Vance?" "No. He didn't care for formalities when he was alive, and looking like this, there's no point in putting on a show. Just burn the body and hand me the ashes." I turned and walked out. My heels clicked sharply against the cold concrete floor. In my mind, I spoke to him. "See, Garrett? Even in death, you never learned how to be clean. You made such a mess of yourself. How do you expect me to cry for you?" The moment I got home, I kicked off my stained designer heels and threw them straight into the outdoor trash bin. I walked barefoot into the silent living room. My phone rang. The screen lit up with the caller ID, "Dad." I answered it. My father's anxious, greedy voice immediately filled the line. "Chloe. I saw the news. Is that dirtbag Garrett really dead? Did the insurance money kick in yet? What did the lawyer say?" I sat on the sofa, staring at the small, black urn resting on the coffee table. "It's taken care of," I said flatly. My father's voice jumped an octave. "How much? Is it over 10 million? Your brother needs a down payment for that penthouse in Manhattan, and his fiancée is demanding a massive wedding. You need to wire us 5 million right now." "No, make it 10. I didn't say a word. My mind was suddenly pulled back to 5 years ago. Back then, I was the golden girl of UPenn, holding a full scholarship, standing proudly in my white dress outside the library. But my father had shown up with a group of angry bookies, grabbing me by my hair and dragging me toward a car. "Who cares about your stupid degree? I owe $8 million. Selling you to that coal miner is the only way to save my neck." I had screamed, cried, and begged for help. No one dared to intervene. Until a mud-splattered Range Rover came speeding in, ramming straight into the bookie's car. Garrett had jumped out of the driver's seat, holding a heavy duffel bag. He slammed the bag onto the hood of his car, the zipper bursting open to reveal stacks of $100 bills. He pointed a finger at the men dragging me and roared, "Take the cash. The girl comes with me." On our wedding night, I had locked myself in the master bedroom, holding a pair of heavy scissors to my throat. I screamed at him, "Don't you dare come near me. You're a kidnapper. I'd rather die than let you touch me." Garrett stood in the doorway, looking incredibly awkward in his ill-fitting tuxedo. I didn't mean to force you, Chloe. Your dad told me you wanted to marry me. He lied to you. You're nothing but an uneducated, backwood brute. You make me sick. Garrett scratched his head, his face turning bright red with embarrassment. Then. I won't touch you. You're a smart girl, a college graduate. I'm just a dumb worker. Having you in my house is enough to make me happy. That night, he actually took a blanket and went to sleep on the living room sofa. The leather sofa was far too small for his 6'3" frame. He had to curl his body up like a giant, clumsy bear. My father's voice was still screaming through the phone. Are you listening to me, you ungrateful brat? It's a blessing that redneck died. Our family is finally free. Get the money and bring it home. Don't you dare keep it all for yourself. Free? I whispered the word. I looked at the cold, black urn on the table. Suddenly, a suffocating tightness gripped my chest. For the first time in my life, I screamed back at my father. He wasn't a redneck. His name was Garrett Vance. My father went quiet for a second, then exploded into a rage. Why are you defending a dead man? He was a dirty, worthless miner. His life wasn't worth a single hair on your brother's head. He was cleaner than anyone in our goddamn family. I slammed the phone down, ending the call, and immediately blocked his number. I threw the phone onto the couch. And then, without warning, tears began to stream down my face. I touched my wet cheeks in confusion. Why was I crying? Was it out of joy for finally being free of my parasitic family? Or was it because the shield that had always stood between me and those monsters had finally crumbled? The doorbell rang. It was Mr. Lawson again. He held another thick manila envelope in his hand. Mrs. Vance, this is the second document Mr. Vance left for you. He instructed me to give this to you only after you had dealt with your family's complications, and your mind was at peace. I wiped my tears and took the envelope. What is this? More money? Mr. Lawson shook his head, his expression incredibly solemn. No. It's Mr. Vance's medical records. Medical records? I pulled the documents out. At the very top was an X-ray of a pair of lungs. The lung tissue was almost entirely black, covered in dense, spiderweb-like shadows and massive fibrotic nodules. Below it was the official diagnosis, late-stage black lung disease, coal workers' pneumoconiosis, with severe respiratory failure. The date on the report was from 3 years ago. My hands began to shake violently. 3 years ago? But 3 years ago, Garrett was as strong as an ox. He could eat a whole steak in minutes. The lawyer spoke softly. Mr. Vance was diagnosed 3 years ago. The specialist told him that if he didn't retire from the high-dust mining environment immediately, he wouldn't survive another 5 years. But... The lawyer paused, looking at me with pity. But right around that time, you two had a massive argument. You told him his money smelled like filthy coal dust. You said you wanted clean the money. Money that could be moved offshore, money that didn't feel dirty. A loud ringing filled my ears. I remembered. I had been mocked by my old college classmates for marrying a crude, dirt money miner. I had come home in a rage, smashing expensive vases. I had pointed at his chest and screamed, "Your money is blood money, Garrett. I feel disgusted just spending it." Garrett had knelt on the floor, quietly picking up the shattered porcelain. After a long silence, he had looked up and said, "Don't be mad, Chloe. I'll figure something out. I'll get you clean money." Mr. Lawson continued. To clean his assets and accumulate $50 million in completely audited, legal cash, Mr. Vance took on several highly dangerous deep well extraction projects. Those were high-yield, high-risk shafts that only desperate workers would ever touch due to the extreme dust density. But they paid the most. He was literally trading his remaining breath for that clean cash. I stared at the black shadows on the X-ray. I remembered how, over the last 2 years, he would always slip down to the basement late at night. I had assumed he was sneaking cigarettes down there and had yelled at him for it. He wasn't smoking. He was suffocating. I remembered finding blood-stained towels in the laundry machine. He had laughed it off, claiming it was just dry weather causing nosebleeds. He was coughing up blood. He was terrified of waking me. He was terrified I would find his blood dirty. So he would press a towel to his mouth, hiding in the dark basement, coughing his lungs to pieces in silence, never making a sound. Because I was the beautiful, delicate swan, and he was just the mud on the ground. How could the mud dare to stain the swan's feathers? I gripped the plastic X-ray sheet so hard the sharp edge sliced into my finger. A drop of bright red blood dripped onto the black image of his ruined lungs. Garrett. Are you completely stupid? The money you bought with your dying breath is sitting in my purse right now. But why does this 50 million feel so much hotter than the coal dust you lived in? The silence of the mansion was no longer peaceful. It was a vacuum, drawing the air straight out of my lungs. I stood in the center of the kitchen, my gaze fixed on the outdoor trash bin. Visible through the floor-to-ceiling glass doors. The rain had begun to fall, a cold, heavy Appalachian downpour that turned the gravel driveway into gray slush. My hands, usually immaculate, were trembling. The drop of my own blood had dried into a tiny, rust-colored star on the black and white acetate of Garrett's X-ray. The trash. A sudden, violent panic seized me. I had thrown the yellow legal pads away. I had thrown his pencils, his dust, his clumsy attempts at drawing, into the waste heap like they were nothing but common filth. I didn't grab an umbrella. I didn't put on shoes. I flung the heavy copper door open and ran out into the freezing mud. The cold water hit my face, melting my expensive makeup, running down my silk dress in cold, muddy rivulets. I didn't care. I lunged at the heavy plastic bin, throwing the lid back with a screech that echoed across the empty estate. Inside, sitting atop the black garbage bags, was the small metal wastebasket I had emptied. I reached in. My manicured nails scraped against the plastic liners. I dragged the yellow papers out, clutching them to my chest. The rain instantly began to smear the charcoal drawings, the black water bleeding across the page. No, no, no. I muttered, my voice cracking, a sound I didn't recognize. I ran back inside, slamming the door shut with my foot, and collapsed onto the cold marble floor of the foyer. I spread the wet, crumpled sheets across the pristine stone. Now, with the knowledge of his black lungs burning in my mind, I looked at the chaotic lines again. They weren't random. They weren't doodles of mine shafts or machinery. My breath caught in my throat. The first page was a profile. The clumsy, heavy strokes of charcoal formed the distinct slope of a forehead, the curve of a nose, the sharp line of a jaw. It was me. He had tried to draw my face. The lines were thick and jagged because his fingers, stiffened by years of manual labor, arthritis, and the systematic loss of oxygen to his joints, couldn't hold a fine pencil. The blunt stubs in the drawer were the result of him pressing down too hard, desperately trying to make his stubborn, calloused hands obey his mind. I flipped to the next page. It was a sketch of me reading on the velvet sofa. He had captured the way I curled my legs under my dress, the slight tilt of my head when I was annoyed. On the corner of the paper, in uneven, childish print, he had painstakingly written CHLOE. He had practiced writing my name dozens of times. The letters crawled across the margins like wounded insects, slipping off the lines, but each one was filled with a desperate, agonizing effort. I touched the paper. The wet charcoal stained my fingers, turning them gray. For 5 years, I had treated this man like a disease. I had sanitized my life to keep his filth away from me. I had demanded that he wash his skin raw, that he keep his boots outside, that he hide his sick, failing body in the basement, so I wouldn't have to look at his lack of refinement. And in return, he had slowly suffocated himself in the deep well dust to buy me a $50 million shield of clean cash, while spending his quiet, lonely nights trying to draw my face on cheap inventory paper because he knew he wasn't allowed to touch the real thing. The first sob tore out of my throat, raw and jagged, sounding like the very coal drills that had killed him. I pressed my face into the wet, soot-stained paper. I didn't care about the chemicals. I didn't care about the black dust on my skin. It smelled of damp earth, cheap cedar pencils, and him. And for the first time in my life, I didn't try to wipe it away. 3 days later, I canceled my flight to Los Angeles. The $50 million debit card sat in the zippered compartment of my bag, untouched. It felt like a lead weight. I called Mr. Lawson into my study. The room was still cold, the mahogany desk bare save for the black urn containing Garrett's ashes. Mrs. Vance, Lawson said, his briefcase resting on his knees. I must advise you against traveling to the Southern District right now. The local union is in an uproar over the cave-in, and the Vance Mining Board is trying to liquidate what they can before the federal investigators freeze the assets. It's chaotic down there. I don't care about the board, I said. My voice was quiet, stripped of its usual haughty edge. I want to see the mine. The one he was working these last 3 years. Lawson sighed, a heavy, tired sound. The Blackwood Shaft. It's in Logan County. It's a deep-sea mine. High sulfur, high dust. No one with any sense goes down there unless they have to. Garrett shouldn't have been within 5 miles of it with his lungs, but I wanted clean money, I finished for him. Lawson didn't deny it. He just looked down at his papers. I'll arrange a driver. No, I said, standing up. I'll drive myself. The journey into the Appalachian coal country was like descending into a different century. As the sleek German SUV wound its way down the narrow, fractured highways of West Virginia, the towering, snow-dusted pines gave way to jagged, sheared mountain faces. The earth here looked wounded, its dark ribs exposed to the gray winter sky. The towns we passed through were ghost towns in slow motion. Rusting pickup trucks sat in gravel driveways, small, sagging wooden houses clung to the hillsides like barnacles. Everything was coated in a fine, persistent layer of gray grit. This was the world Garrett had come from. This was the dirt I had despised. I pulled into the gravel lot of the Vance Mining Corp office in Logan County. It was a miserable, double-wide trailer surrounded by chain-link fencing. A yellow crane loomed in the distance, its steel cables frozen against the low-hanging clouds. As I stepped out of the car, the cold wind whipped my hair across my face. The air tasted different here, heavy, metallic, and thick with the scent of coal and damp slate. It felt like breathing in the grave. Inside the trailer, 3 men were huddled around a kerosene heater, drinking coffee from stained styrofoam cups. They wore faded flannel shirts and heavy work boots. When the door opened and I stepped in, wearing a long cashmere coat and leather gloves, the room went dead silent. The oldest man, his face etched with deep, coal-lined wrinkles, set his cup down. His eyes were hard. "Can we help you, ma'am?" he asked, though his tone said the exact opposite. "I'm Chloe Vance," I said. The silence stretched, turning thick and hostile. One of the younger men spat into a trash can. "Garrett's wife," the older man said slowly. He stood up, his joints popping. "I'm Miller, head foreman. We didn't expect to see you here. We figured you'd be halfway to California by now with his bank accounts." The words stung, but I didn't flinch. I deserved them. "I came to see where he worked," I said. "And I want to see his things. Whatever he left here." Miller let out a dry, hacking laugh that sounded terrifyingly like the coughs I used to hear coming from our basement. "His things?" Garrett didn't keep much. Mrs. Vance. He spent every dime he had keeping this company afloat so the men would keep getting paid, and the rest, well, we know where the rest went. He walked over to a metal filing cabinet in the corner, yanked open a squeaking drawer, and pulled out a battered, blue plastic crate. He set it on the table with a heavy thud. "That's his locker," Miller said. "Take it and go. We've got a funeral for 2 of our boys tomorrow, and we don't need a tourist from Philadelphia hanging around." "Pennsylvania," I corrected softly, my fingers brushing the edge of the blue crate. "I went to UPenn." "Same difference to us," Miller muttered, turning his back to me. I carried the crate out to my car. Sitting in the driver's seat, with the heater blasting, I pulled the items out one by one. There was a pair of heavily worn, steel-toed boots, the leather cracked and stained with white salt rings from his sweat. There was a cheap plastic digital watch with a cracked face, its strap held together by black electrical tape. And at the bottom of the crate lay a small, laminated photograph. My breath caught. It was my graduation photo. I was standing in front of the university library, holding my diploma, smiling a bright, arrogant smile. The edges of the lamination were melted and scorched, and the back of the photo was stained with a dark, greasy thumbprint. He had kept it in his breast pocket, right against his chest, under his heavy canvas work jacket, in the deepest, darkest, dirtiest hole in the earth. He had carried my clean, smiling face with him every single day. I pressed the photograph to my lips. The plastic was cold, but it tasted of salt. "You stupid, beautiful fool," I whispered into the empty car. "Why did you love me so much?" I didn't leave Logan County. I checked into a bleak, one-star motel off the highway, where the water from the tap smelled faintly of sulfur and the heater clanked like a dying engine. My family tried to reach me. My brother sent 47 text messages, ranging from demands for money to outright threats. "If you don't wire the $5 million by Friday, the creditors are going to take the boat. Dad is having a panic attack. You're a selfish bitch, Chloe." I blocked his number. Then I called my family's attorney and instructed him to cut off all allowance payments to my father and brother immediately. "Mrs. Vance," the attorney warned, "they will sue you. They will claim the estate belongs to them as Garrett's in-laws." "Let them try," I said coldly. "Tell them if they set foot in West Virginia, I'll have them arrested for harassment. And tell my father that if he calls me again, I'll release the financial records of his illegal gambling debts to the federal prosecutors." I hung up. It felt like cutting away dead, rotten flesh. For years, I had allowed myself to be sold and used by my family, holding on to my arrogance as a defense mechanism. But looking at the dirt on my fingers now, I realized that the only truly filthy thing in my life had been my own bloodline. The next morning, the sky was a heavy, bruised purple. I drove back to the Blackwood shaft. The mountain road was slick with black ice. But I drove with a strange, steady determination. When I arrived, the mine entrance was surrounded by state police cars and federal safety vehicles. The cave-in site was blocked off by yellow tape, but I could see the collapsed mouth of the shaft, a jagged maw of splintered timber and crushed stone. I found Miller standing near the generator shed, his face pale, a clipboard in his hand. "What are you still doing here?" he asked, his voice rough. "I want to know what happened," I said, stepping up next to him. I was wearing a pair of thick, practical boots I had bought at a local general store, and my cashmere coat was already spotted with coal dust. Miller looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to find the arrogant girl he had seen the day before. Finding only a pale, quiet woman with dark circles under her eyes, his posture softened slightly. "It was a pillar failure," Miller said, pointing a calloused finger toward the collapsed entrance. "The deep seam is old. The coal is rich, but the stone above, it is rotten slate. We knew the roof was moving. The sensors were screaming." "Then why did he go down?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Because of the bonuses," Miller said quietly. "And because of the audit." He turned to look at me, his eyes reflecting the dull gray light of the valley. Garrett needed $50 million in clean, audited cash by Christmas Eve. The bank wouldn't release the final offshore transfer until the production quota for the Blackwood shaft was certified by the state inspector. The inspector refused to sign off unless we cleared the last 3,000 tons from the deep. Well, my stomach turned. "He did it for the money." "He did it for your money," Miller corrected. "We told him to wait until spring. We told him the mountain was angry. But he said his wife's family was circling like vultures, and he wanted to make sure you had your security before his lungs gave out. He knew he didn't have much time left anyway." Miller took a deep breath, his chest rattling. The day of the collapse, Garrett was down there with the night shift, shoveling the coal onto the conveyor himself because his fingers were too stiff to operate the continuous miner. When the roof started to give, he didn't run. He stayed behind to manual override the emergency steel shield so the younger boys could get to the lift. A tear slipped down my cheek, freezing in the biting wind. "He pushed Bobby and young Terry into the cage," Miller said, his voice cracking. "They told us he was coughing so hard he couldn't even stand straight. But he held that hydraulic lever down with his shoulder until the cage cleared the shaft. Then the mountain came down." I closed my eyes. I could see him in the dark, suffocating heat of the deep well, his lungs burning, his body broken, holding up the weight of the earth so other men could go home to their families. And all the while, I had been in our clean, warm mansion, drinking expensive tea, waiting for him to die so I could be free. "He didn't have to die down there, Mrs. Vance," Miller said softly. "But he loved you more than he loved his own breath. We all knew it. We didn't think you deserved it." "I didn't," I whispered. "I never did." The funeral for the 3 miners who died alongside Garrett was held in a small, white-clapboard Baptist church at the bottom of the hollow. I sat in the back pew, away from the families. I didn't want my presence to offend them. I wore a simple black wool coat, my hair pulled back, no makeup, no jewelry. The air in the church was thick with the scent of damp wool, cheap carnations, and candle wax. The casket at the front was closed. It was Garrett's. The preacher spoke of sacrifice, of men who laid down their lives for their friends. He didn't mention Garrett's wealth, his mansion, or his coal mining empire. He spoke only of the boy who had started sorting slate at 14, who had never forgotten where he came from, and who had died with his hands on the safety lever. When the service ended, the congregation slowly filed out. As I stood up to leave, a young woman with a red-faced toddler clutching her skirt stopped in front of my pew. It was the wife of one of the miners Garrett had saved. She looked at me, her eyes red and swollen. I braced myself for her anger, for her spit. Instead, she reached out and pressed a small, cold object into my hand. "Garrett gave my husband his bonus 3 days before he went down," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He told us to buy the baby a warm coat for the winter. He said he knew what it was like to be cold." She squeezed my hand and walked away. I looked down at what she had given me. It was a heavy, silver pocket watch. On the back, crudely engraved with a pocket knife, were the initials G.V. I held the watch to my ear. It was still ticking, a steady, metallic heartbeat. In the quiet church, I walked out into the snow. Mr. Lawson was waiting for me in his car by the cemetery gate. I walked over and opened the passenger door. "Mr. Lawson," I said. "We're not liquidating the Vance mining assets." The lawyer blinked in surprise. "But Mrs. Vance, the legal disputes, the environmental fines from the collapse, it's a logistical nightmare. The board Is ready to sell the leases to a multinational conglomerate for pennies on the dollar. No, I said, my voice firming with a strength I hadn't felt in years. We are keeping the mines. We are going to use the $50 million from the clean account to pay off the safety fines, upgrade the ventilation systems in every shaft, and buy the best respirators available on the market. Lawson stared at me, his mouth slightly open. But that money was for your lifestyle. Your security. You could live in luxury for the rest of your life. I don't want luxury, I said, looking back at the small white church. I want the money to be clean. Truly clean. Not just legally audited, but clean of blood, clean of soot, and clean of his pain. I climbed into the driver's seat of my car. I want you to set up a trust. The Garrett Vance Foundation. It will provide full medical coverage for every miner in this valley with black lung disease. We will build a clinic right here in Logan County. Lawson looked at me for a long moment, a slow, respectful smile creeping onto his face. Your husband would have liked that, Mrs. Vance. My husband, I said, was the only decent man I ever knew. 6 months later, the West Virginia spring had arrived, turning the jagged gray mountains into a vibrant, brilliant green. The air was sweet with the scent of wild ramps and damp pine needle soil. The Blackwood shaft had been closed permanently, sealed with concrete and turned into a memorial park. But 3 miles down the road, the new Vance No. 1 shaft was operating under the strictest safety guidelines in the country. The miners wore state-of-the-art respirators, and the air quality inside the seam was tested hourly. I stood on the hillside overlooking the valley, the wind catching the skirt of my simple cotton dress. My hands were no longer perfectly smooth. They were slightly tanned, the nails short and clean, but without the expensive manicures I used to obsess over. I carried a small, heavy ceramic jar in my hands. Inside were Garrett's ashes. I hadn't buried him in the cold, dark earth. I didn't want him under the heavy slate he had fought his whole life. I opened the jar. The ash was gray and fine, catching the wind as I poured it out over the green valley. It drifted across the treetops, disappearing into the bright spring air. Free of the dark shafts, free of the heavy dust, free of the suffocating weight of the mountain. You're clean now, Garrett, I whispered. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small, laminated photograph of me at my graduation. The black thumbprint on the back was still there, but it didn't look like filth to me anymore. It looked like love. I tucked the photo into the ceramic jar, sealed it, and placed it gently in the hollow of a great oak tree overlooking the valley he had saved. I turned and walked back down the mountain, my boots crunching softly on the gravel path. I had $50 million, a vast mining company, and a name that was feared by my greedy family and respected by the people of the valley. But as I looked down at my hands, slightly dusty from the trail, I realized that the greatest inheritance Garrett Vance had left me wasn't his cash. It was the soul he had forced me to find.